Nothing prepares you for the moment you realize your marriage isn't just broken, it's been laughing at you behind your back. It was 2:07 a.m. when I found the handcuffs in my husband's bag. I wasn't snooping. I keep telling myself that because intention matters. I had a splitting headache after a 12-hour shift coordinating a renovation project that had gone sideways, and all I wanted was a couple of Tylenol and silence. Mark's leather work bag was sitting on the kitchen counter, right where he dropped it when he came home an hour earlier from what he casually called a team bonding night. He'd kissed my cheek, quick, distracted, smelling like whiskey and something sweeter. Not perfume exactly, something expensive, something intimate. Then he mumbled something about his coworker Tina being a total disaster before heading upstairs without even looking back. My fingers brushed the pill bottle, and then they hit cold metal. Not plastic, not novelty, not the cheap, fuzzy kind people laugh about in bad jokes. Real handcuffs. Heavy, chrome, professional grade. A tiny key dangling from the chain like an afterthought. I stood there in my kitchen, fluorescent light buzzing overhead, rain hammering the windows of our half-renovated New England house, holding an object that did not belong in my life or my marriage. My name is Emma Turner. I'm 44 years old. I manage projects for a living. Budgets, timelines, structural risks. I'm very good at identifying problems before they collapse. Apparently, I missed the biggest one. Mark is 46, a general contractor. The kind of man people describe as solid, dependable, rough hands, steady income, the guy who fixes everyone else's broken houses while quietly letting his own rot from the inside. The handcuffs had weight, purpose. They weren't a joke. They were a choice. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. My hands didn't even shake, which surprised me. Instead, something slow and deliberate settled in my chest. Not rage, not yet, but clarity. I left the cuffs exactly where they were, but I slipped the key into my pocket. Call it instinct. Call it insurance. Call it the moment I stopped being the woman who trusted and became the woman who paid attention. Because that night, standing alone in my kitchen while the rain tried to wash the town away, I realized something terrifying. I didn't know the man I was married to, and whatever game he was playing behind my back, I had just made my first move. If you had asked me a year ago whether my husband could cheat on me, not just cheat, but build an entire secret life with enough confidence to leave evidence in his own bag, I would have laughed in your face. Not because I thought our marriage was perfect, but because I thought Mark was simple, in a good way. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't the type who needed attention. He was the man who would rather replace a rotting porch beam than spend money on a weekend getaway. The man who wore the same boots until the soles were literally separating. The man who came home smelling like sawdust and sweat, kissed my forehead, ate whatever I cooked, and fell asleep to the sound of sports highlights or old crime shows. The kind of man who, on paper, doesn't scream affair. And I was the kind of woman who didn't chase drama. I'm Emma Turner, 44, organized to the point of obsession. The person friends call when they need a plan, a spreadsheet, a calm voice in a crisis. I manage renovation projects for clients with money and expectations, people who don't tolerate mistakes. My job taught me two things. Details matter, and people lie when they're afraid. When Mark and I met, neither of us was who we are now. It was 14 years ago, at a hardware store in town. The only one that stayed open late. The kind where you can still smell fertilizer and old wood in the aisles. I was standing in front of paint samples, completely overwhelmed, trying to pretend I knew the difference between cool gray and warm gray, like it mattered. Mark was behind me, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a hoodie with drywall dust on the sleeves, like he'd been hugged by a chalkboard. "You're overthinking it," he said, voice calm, almost amused. I turned, annoyed at first, because I hate being watched while I'm deciding something. But then he smiled, and it wasn't charming in a practiced way. It was honest, like he didn't know how to be anything else. "Excuse me?" I said, eyebrow raised. He pointed at the samples in my hand. "None of those grays will look gray once they're on the wall. They'll look blue, or green, or like sadness." I snorted despite myself. "So what do you recommend, paint expert?" He stepped closer, reached past me, and pulled down a shade I hadn't noticed. "This one. It'll look like clean light instead of regret." That was the first thing Mark ever gave me, a solution that felt steady. We talked for 20 minutes right there in the aisle. About paint, about houses, about how this town always felt damp, like it couldn't fully dry out after winter. He told me he worked construction jobs all over New England. I told him I'd just moved back after years in the city because my dad had been sick and I didn't want to miss whatever time was left. Mark didn't flirt in a slick way. He didn't try to impress me. He just stayed present. 2 days later, I ran into him again at the diner on Main Street. He was in a booth with a coffee so black it looked like punishment, reading a folded blueprint like it was a newspaper. He saw me, lifted his chin in a quiet greeting, and said, "How's the paint decision?" I sat down without thinking. And that was that. Dating Mark felt like slipping into a pair of jeans that fit right the first time, comfortable, familiar, not trying too hard. He was reliable, protective. Even when we argued, he never went below the belt. He didn't throw words like knives. He shut down instead, quiet, stubborn, and irritatingly composed. He proposed 8 months later in our unfinished living room. No restaurant, no crowd. He was wearing work jeans. I had paint in my hair. He got down on one knee on bare subfloor and held up a simple ring. "I'm not a fancy man," he said, "but I'm serious. I want you. For real. For life." I remember laughing, crying, and saying yes all at once. We got married at the town hall, then had a small reception at Murphy's Bar because my dad insisted life should be celebrated wherever people actually show up. Mark's friends toasted too loudly. My mother cried into a napkin. The band played something off-key. It was imperfect and warm and ours. For the first few years, it was good. Not romantic movie good. Real good. We bought this old fixer-upper because Mark saw potential. I saw mold and water damage, but I also saw his eyes light up when he talked about beams and foundations like they were living things. We worked side by side on weekends. He taught me how to use a drill. I taught him how to read contracts without missing the fine print. It felt like building something together. And I didn't notice, at first, how life can shift without making a sound. The first subtle change was his schedule. Mark started taking more late jobs, emergency calls, quick fixes that turned into 4-hour disappearances. I didn't question it because he's a contractor. Odd hours are normal. Then came the team building nights. Men he barely used to mention suddenly had names, stories, inside jokes I wasn't part of. And then the work trips, conferences, out-of-town supplier meetings. 3 days here, 2 nights there. At first, I admired it. I even defended him when friends raised eyebrows. Mark's finally expanding, I'd say. He's trying to grow the business. But over time, those trips started to feel less like ambition and more like escape. And I started noticing other things. The way he checked his phone like it might bite him. The way he kept it screened down on the counter. The way he would step outside to take calls even when it was freezing and raining. And worst of all, the way his eyes would flick away from mine when I asked normal questions. Not guilty like in movies. Just practiced. Mark's sister Gina used to tell me, "You're lucky. My brother is simple. He won't ever be the kind of man who hurts a woman." She said it like a blessing. But looking back, I realize something now. Simple men don't always stay simple. Sometimes they just learn to hide complexity. Because here's the part I'm ashamed to admit. There were signs. Not screaming, dramatic signs. Small ones, quiet ones. The kind you ignore because you'd rather protect the story you've been telling yourself. And I ignored them. Until 2:07 a.m. when my fingers closed around cold chrome in the dark. And suddenly, every normal thing in my life started to look like a lie. After the night I found the handcuffs, I didn't confront Mark. That surprised even me. I'm not passive. I don't freeze under pressure. In my job, when something doesn't add up, I dig until it does. But marriage is different. Marriage isn't a spreadsheet you can audit without consequences. It's a shared reality. And once you crack it, you don't get to pretend everything's fine again. So I did what women like me often do when something feels wrong but isn't yet undeniable. I watched. I listened. I waited. The next morning, Mark was already dressed when I came downstairs. Boots on, jacket zipped, coffee untouched on the counter like he'd poured it out of habit, not hunger. He looked alert, wired, not tired the way he used to look after long days. "I've got an early sight check," he said, slinging his bag over his shoulder. "That bag!" The same one that had held the handcuffs. "Already?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral as I poured myself coffee. "Yeah, client's antsy." He checked his phone, then checked it again. His knee bounced once, twice, before he caught himself and stilled it. Nervous energy rolled off him in waves. "How was Tina last night?" I asked casually. "What?" His head snapped up too fast, too sharp. "You mentioned she was a mess." "Oh, yeah." He laughed, but it came out brittle. "Same old drama, you know how she is." I didn't, actually. Tina had gone from a background name to a frequent character in Mark's stories without me ever really meeting her. He leaned in and kissed my cheek. Quick, distracted, already halfway out the door. I'll be late tonight, he added. Meeting after work. Of course. The door closed. His truck rumbled away. And I stood there in the quiet kitchen, holding my mug, replaying the exchange like slow-motion footage. Something wasn't just off. It was rehearsed. Over the next few days, the pattern sharpened. Mark's phone never left his side. Not to shower, not to take out the trash, not even when he slept. It sat face down on the nightstand like a secret he was guarding with his body. He stopped asking about my day, not because he didn't care, but because he didn't want to give me space to ask about his. When I talked, he nodded at the right moments, offered the right responses, but his eyes weren't there. They were somewhere else, with someone else. And then there were the absences. Tuesdays and Thursdays. Always Tuesdays and Thursdays. Late site walkthrough. Supplier dinner. Networking thing. The words changed. The timing didn't. I started noticing how the house felt when he wasn't home. Not lonely. Vacant. Like someone had already left, but forgotten their things. The worst part wasn't suspicion. It was the way my body seemed to know before my mind was ready to accept it. My chest would tighten when I heard his truck pull in late. My stomach would drop when his phone lit up and he turned it away from me. My skin would prickle when he laughed at messages he didn't share. I told myself I was being paranoid. That's what women are trained to do. Doubt their instincts before doubting men. But then his family started to notice things too. Gina made a comment at Sunday dinner. Mark's been busy, she said, spearing a piece of chicken. Always running somewhere. Mark shrugged, trying to keep the business afloat. Gina looked at me, eyebrows lifting just slightly. Emma's always been the organized one. You sure you're not hiding from home, little brother? He laughed too hard. Don't start. The way he shut it down felt defensive. Later, when I was clearing dishes, Gina leaned in and murmured, You okay? Why wouldn't I be? She studied me for a second. Just asking. That was all she said. But it stayed with me. Friends started dropping hints too, the kind that pretend to be harmless. Oh, Mark's out a lot lately. Must be nice, all that freedom. You're so chill about everything. Chill. As if being calm meant being blind. The town itself seemed to know something I didn't, or maybe something I was refusing to name. Even Mr. Sykes, the old man across the street who noticed everything and said almost nothing, started watching Mark's comings and goings more closely. One morning, as Mark pulled out of the driveway, Sykes nodded at him, then looked at me, held my gaze just a second longer than usual. A silent question. I began retracing conversations in my head, moments I'd brushed off. Mark snapping once when I asked to borrow his truck. Mark accusing me of overthinking when I mentioned how distant he felt. Mark telling me, not everything is about you, during a small argument that felt bigger than it should have been. And underneath all of it was one thought I couldn't shake. If nothing is wrong, why does everything feel like it's being hidden? I didn't need proof yet, but I could feel the ground shifting under my feet. The foundation wasn't cracked. It was hollow, and sooner or later, something was going to collapse. The truth didn't arrive all at once. It leaked. Slow, precise, impossible to ignore once it started. It was the morning after I found the handcuffs. Mark was already gone when I woke up. No note, no text, just the empty side of the bed still warm, like he'd left in a hurry. I stood there longer than necessary, staring at the ceiling, letting my heartbeat settle. I told myself not to act emotionally. Emotion makes mistakes. Evidence doesn't. By mid-morning, the rain had returned. The kind of cold, relentless drizzle this town wears like a second skin. I finished a client call, closed my laptop, and did something that felt strangely calm. I checked Mark's car, not because I wanted to spy, because my gut told me there was something there. Old man Sykes was across the street, washing his Buick for the third time this week. He glanced up as I walked down the driveway, then looked away again. Small town choreography. Everyone sees. No one speaks. Mark's truck was locked, but I know his habits. The spare key lives behind the left tire, taped inside the wheel well, a trick he taught me himself years ago. I opened the door and climbed in. The smell hit me first. Leather, coffee, and something faintly unfamiliar. A clean, expensive scent that didn't belong to me. I checked the center console. Nothing. Glove compartment. Registration. Insurance. And then, tucked beneath the papers like it was meant to be forgotten, a cheap flip phone. Not a smartphone. Not a work-issued device. A burner. My pulse slowed instead of spiking. That scared me more than panic would have. I powered it on. No passcode. No hesitation. Just dozens of messages lighting up the screen from a contact labeled with a single letter. M. I didn't scroll at first. I just stared at the preview text, my vision narrowing as each line landed like a controlled detonation. Can't wait for next week. 3 days. Just us. Bring the handcuffs. I'll bring the wine. My mouth went dry. I sat there in Mark's truck, rain tapping the windshield, while the rest of the conversation unfolded under my thumb like a confession no one had bothered to hide. Your wife really doesn't know. She's clueless, too busy managing her little projects. There it was, my name reduced to a punchline. I kept scrolling. The messages weren't vague. They weren't flirtatious guesses or misunderstood jokes. They were explicit. Hotels, positions, fantasies, things Mark hadn't done with me in years, not because I didn't want them, but because he'd stopped trying. And threaded through it all was laughter. At me. At my trust. At how easy it was to lie. My hands didn't shake. I noticed that. Instead, I felt something colder settle into place, like a door locking behind me. I took photos of everything. Every message. Every timestamp. Every cruel joke at my expense. Then I put the phone back exactly where I'd found it, slid out of the truck, locked the door, and stood there in the rain longer than necessary. When I looked up, Sykes was watching me again. Not curious. Concerned. He gave a small nod, the kind that says, I see it too. I nodded back. That night, I didn't confront Mark. I called Rachel and Tom instead, the couple who'd known us since before the wedding, before the house, before life got complicated. Tom is a plumber. Rachel knows everyone. If something happens in this town, she hears about it before it becomes public. They came over after Mark left for what he called a supplier dinner. I showed them the photos in my basement office, surrounded by project binders and blueprints. The quiet, practical evidence of the life I'd actually built. Rachel covered her mouth. Oh, Emma. How long? Tom asked quietly. Months, maybe longer. Rachel's face tightened. I thought you knew. The words hit harder than the texts. Knew what? She hesitated, then said it anyway. People talk. Tina's been careless. Hair salon, gym, Facebook comments. My chest constricted. How many people? I asked. Rachel looked down. Enough. Enough. That was the moment the betrayal expanded beyond Mark. This wasn't just an affair. It was a shared joke. I pulled up another photo, a location log I'd quietly enabled months earlier through our shared phone plan. Tuesdays and Thursdays. The same address downtown, over and over. Rachel leaned forward. That's Riverside condos. Expensive? Discreet. Tom swore under his breath. Who's M? That's what I need to find out. You could confront him, Tom said carefully. And let him deny it? Gaslight me? Turn this into a dramatic scene where I lose half my life and he walks away clean? I shook my head. No, not yet. Rachel studied me. You're planning something. I'm planning not to be the last person in town to understand what's happening in my own marriage. They exchanged a look, the kind married couples use when they know something serious has shifted. What do you need? Rachel asked. Information, who she is, where she works, what she stands to lose. Rachel already had her phone out. Give her time, she always delivers. 40 minutes later, she looked up. Miles Gannon, 38, sales director at the same company Mark's been networking with. Divorced 2 years ago, lives in Riverside, Unit 4 Mile Ave. She paused, then added softly, Emma, this isn't new, it's just new to you. The room felt smaller. I closed my eyes for 1 second, then I opened them. Thank you, I said, both of you. As they left, I sat alone in the basement, the sound of rain seeping through concrete walls, and thought about the handcuff keys still warm in my pocket. I hadn't known what I was holding that night. Now I did. This wasn't just proof. It was leverage. And the game had officially begun. People expect rage when betrayal is confirmed. Screaming, crying, thrown objects, public scenes. That didn't happen. What came instead was something quieter, heavier. Like my body understood the truth before my emotions caught up. For 2 days after I found the burner phone, I moved through my life on autopilot. I answered emails. I attended meetings. I nodded at the right moments. I even laughed once, which startled me more than tears would have. At night, I lay awake beside Mark, listening to his breathing, steady, unbothered, and wondered how a man could sleep so well while dismantling someone else's reality piece by piece. Every so often, his phone would light up. He'd tilt it away. My jaw would tighten. But I stayed silent, because silence, I was learning, makes liars careless. On the third night, Mark came home late, nearly midnight. I was sitting at the kitchen table, paperwork spread out in front of me like a shield. You're still up? He asked, loosening his jacket. Deadlines, I said. He nodded, relieved. Long day. You've been having a lot of those. His movements paused, just for a fraction of a second. Then he shrugged. That's business. I looked at him then. Really looked. The man I'd married had always been solid in my mind, like a load-bearing beam. But now I could see the hairline fractures, the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes flicked toward his bag as if checking that it was still closed. I feel like we don't talk anymore, I said. Carefully, neutrally, no accusation. He sighed, already defensive. Emma, not this tonight. Not what? This interrogation. I'm exhausted. I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms. When was the last time you asked how I was? He frowned. I ask all the time. When? Silence. He ran a hand through his hair. Look, if this is about work, you know I'm trying to build something here. Some of us don't get to coast. There it was, the subtle dig. The implication that my career was lighter, easier, less valuable. I nodded slowly. You're right, I said. Some of us are still climbing. The words landed harder than I expected. His jaw tightened. He grabbed a beer from the fridge and took a long pull, avoiding my eyes. I've got a conference next week, he said finally. Out of town. 3 days. Another one. I'll need you to handle things here. Of course. When is it? I asked. Sunday to Wednesday. I glanced down at the notes I'd already made. The same days the text mentioned. Portland? I asked. His eyes flicked up. Yeah. A lie, delivered smoothly. My chest didn't ache. It cooled. Sounds important, I said. For your career. He nodded, satisfied. It is. He went upstairs without kissing me goodnight. I sat there long after the sound of the shower faded, my thoughts looping around one question I couldn't shake. What did I do to make him think I deserved this? That question lingered longer than it should have. Because even with evidence, women are taught to search for their own failures first. Maybe I worked too much. Maybe I became predictable. Maybe I stopped trying. The self-blame crept in quietly, insidiously. And then I caught myself. No, plenty of people get bored. Not everyone lies. Not everyone humiliates the person who trusts them. Not everyone turns their spouse into a joke for strangers. The next morning, I waited until Mark left. Then I went into his home office. The door was locked. He never locked it before. That alone felt like a confession. I unlocked it easily. I'd installed the handle myself years ago when we redid the hallway. The room looked normal at first glance. Desk, monitor, filing cabinet, motivational posters about growth and discipline. But something was missing. His laptop. Mark always complained about how heavy it was, how he hated carrying it home. Now it was gone. I checked the car again that afternoon. The burner phone was still there. New messages had come in. She's acting weird. Did you say anything to anyone? Relax. She doesn't know. She's probably just picking up on small-town gossip. Gossip. That word burned. I placed the phone back carefully, like I was handling a weapon. That night I called Rachel. I need help, I said simply. With what? I need to know everything. Where he goes. Who he meets. How deep this goes. There was a pause. Emma, are you sure? I closed my eyes. Yes. Because something had shifted inside me. The woman who had believed explanations was gone. In her place stood someone quieter. Sharper. And for the first time since the handcuffs, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was preparing. Once I stopped asking why and started asking how, everything accelerated. Rachel moved quietly, the way women do when they're protecting someone they care about. No drama, no announcements, just questions placed carefully into the right conversations. A comment here, a pause there. The town responded the way it always does when secrets start cracking. With relief. By Wednesday night, I knew more about my own marriage than I ever wanted to. Mark wasn't just seeing someone. He was comfortable. Comfortable enough to develop routines. Comfortable enough to reuse lies. Comfortable enough to believe I would never challenge the version of him he was selling. Rachel confirmed what the location logs already showed. The Riverside condos weren't random. Unit 412 wasn't a fluke. It was the place. Tuesdays and Thursdays. Always after 7. Always gone by midnight. I didn't confront him. I followed him. The first time, my hands shook on the steering wheel. Not from fear, but from the adrenaline of doing something irreversible. Once you see a betrayal with your own eyes, there's no pretending later that you misunderstood. Mark left the house just after 6:30, wearing a jacket I didn't recognize. He checked his reflection in the window of his truck before pulling out, smoothing his hair the way he never bothered to do for me anymore. I waited 5 minutes. Then I drove. Riverside condos rose out of the downtown gloom like a private island. Clean lines, security cameras, the kind of place that promised discretion to people who paid for it. Mark parked in the visitor spot. He checked his phone. smiled, and walked inside like he belonged there. I sat in my car, heart steady, breath slow, watching the entrance. At 10:58 p.m., he came back out. His hair was rumpled, his jacket crooked, his phone in his hand, typing fast. He didn't look guilty. He looked satisfied. That was the moment something inside me hardened. Not rage. Resolve. The next escalation came faster than I expected. Rachel called the following morning. "Emma, I need to tell you something." Her voice was tight. "What?" "People know, not just suspects. No." My fingers tightened around the mug in my hand. "How many?" "Enough that it's being discussed like weather." I exhaled slowly. "And no one told me." "They assumed you already knew," she said gently, "or that you didn't want to." That hurt more than the affair itself. The idea that people had watched me smile at Mark in public, defend him, laugh off comments, all while knowing he was betraying me, made my stomach turn. This wasn't just his lie. It was communal silence. That night, Mark mentioned the conference again. "Portland," he said casually. "Sunday." I nodded. 3 days, right? "Yeah. Important for your career." He smiled, satisfied. "Exactly." I watched him pack. Carefully, methodically. He placed the handcuffs into a side pocket of his bag without hesitation. Didn't even check for the key. That was the moment I knew how far this had gone. Because people who think they're in control stop checking their exits. Once he left, I moved. I installed a small voice-activated recorder in his truck visor, hidden behind the lining where it would catch everything without being seen. I cloned the burner phone using software Tom had quietly mentioned existed. I set alerts for keywords, dates, locations. And then I waited. On Sunday afternoon, Mark kissed my cheek with the same hollow affection and said, "Love you." I watched his truck disappear down the street. Then I checked the tracker. He didn't head north. He went east, toward the coast, toward the Ocean View Resort, a boutique hotel that didn't host construction conferences. My chest tightened, not with shock, but with confirmation. The recorder caught everything. The call he made the moment he hit the highway. 3 days, he said, laughing. "Just us." A woman's voice responded. Warm, familiar now. "Did you bring them?" "Of course." "Good. Last time was fun, but I couldn't find the key afterward." They laughed. At me. At my trust. At how easy it was. I sat in my kitchen, listening to my husband plan 3 days of intimacy with another woman while I watered the same houseplants we'd owned for a decade. And something fundamental shifted. This wasn't grief anymore. This was preparation. Because they weren't hiding. They were careless. And careless people make mistakes. I didn't need to rush. I needed them to feel safe. To believe they had won. And when the moment came, when everything finally collapsed, I wanted it to be undeniable. Public. Unavoidable. I looked at the handcuff key resting quietly in my drawer. Soon, I thought. Very soon. People think the darkest moment is when you discover the affair. It isn't. The darkest moment comes later. When the shock wears off, the evidence is complete, and you're left alone with the weight of knowing exactly how replaceable you were in someone else's story. Mark was gone. 3 days. The house felt different without him. Not emptier, just quieter in a way that made every sound too loud. The refrigerator hum. The clock ticking. The floorboards settling like they were whispering things I didn't want to hear. I tried to distract myself with work. I failed. Every email felt trivial, every deadline absurd. How do you argue over tile samples and permit approvals when your entire marriage has been reduced to a punchline between hotel sheets? At night, I sat on the edge of the bed we shared and listened to the recordings again. Not because I wanted to, because some part of me needed to punish myself with the truth. Mark's voice sounded different when he wasn't talking to me. Lighter, more animated, like the man I married had been stored away and only brought out for someone else. "She doesn't suspect anything," he said at one point, confident. "Emma's predictable. She trusts me." Predictable. The word landed like a bruise. The woman laughed. Soft, intimate. "That's kind of sad." "Yeah," Mark replied, "but it makes life easier." I turned off the recording and sat in the dark. For the first time since this started, I cried. Not loud, dramatic sobs. Quiet ones. The kind that slip out when you finally admit you love someone more than they ever loved you back. I thought about the years. The mornings I woke up early to pack his lunches. The weekends I rearranged my schedule around his jobs. The way I defended him when friends joked about his absences. I thought about how carefully I'd built my life. Stable, organized, loyal, believing that consistency was a kind of love language. And suddenly, that consistency felt like a flaw. Like it made me boring. Easy to cheat on. Easy to underestimate. That's where the real pain lived. Not in the sex. but in the disrespect. The casual cruelty of being mocked while still doing the laundry, still paying bills, still keeping the life running smoothly so he could escape it without consequences. At some point after midnight, I walked through the house. I touched the walls we'd painted together. The kitchen counter we'd argued over for weeks before choosing. The doorway where he had once lifted me and spun me around because we'd finally passed inspection. I sat on the living room floor and let the memories crash over me all at once. And for the first time, I wondered something terrifying. What if this is it? What if this is all I get? A marriage that ends in humiliation. A town that watched silently. A life where I did everything right and still got betrayed. The thought hollowed me out. I didn't feel angry. I felt small, disposable, like I could disappear and the world would simply adjust. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. A message from Mark. Made it safely. Busy day tomorrow. Miss you. I stared at it for a long time. My fingers hovered over the screen. I could confront him now. I could explode, demand answers, beg him to explain how he could do this to me. Instead, I put the phone face down. And in that moment, sitting alone in the quiet house, surrounded by the life I'd helped build, I understood something painful and necessary. If I begged, I would lose more than my marriage. I would lose myself. That night, I slept on the couch. Not because I couldn't bear the bed, but because I needed to feel the truth of being alone, fully, honestly, before I could decide what to do next. And when morning came, something had changed. The sadness was still there, but beneath it was something new, something steadier. The beginning of resolve. The turning point didn't arrive with shouting. It arrived with clarity. On the second morning of Mark's conference, I woke up before sunrise. Not from anxiety, but from certainty. The kind that settles deep in your bones and refuses to be ignored. I didn't cry. I didn't pace. I made coffee and opened my laptop. If I was going to end this, I was going to end it cleanly. I reviewed everything I had gathered, not emotionally, but strategically. The burner phone logs, the location history, the audio recordings from his truck, the messages mocking me by name, the timestamps lining up perfectly with his lies. This wasn't suspicion anymore. It was a timeline. And timelines don't lie. Mid-morning, I received a notification from the recorder. Live audio. Mark was in the hotel room. I hesitated, then tapped play. His voice came through clearly, relaxed, unguarded. "This is perfect," he said. "No questions, no stress, just us." The woman laughed. "You're sure your wife won't show up?" Mark snorted. "Emma, please. She won't even check. She trusts me too much." There it was again. Trust, framed like stupidity. That was the exact moment something inside me went quiet. Not numb. Focused. I didn't feel like a victim anymore. I felt like someone who finally understood the rules of the game. I paused the audio and sat back. For weeks I'd been reacting, absorbing blows, collecting proof, enduring humiliation quietly. Now it was time to choose. I could confront him privately. Drag this into a messy, emotional standoff where he would deny, minimize, blame stress, blame me. Or I could let the truth speak for itself, without yelling, without begging, without giving him space to rewrite the narrative. I looked at the handcuff key resting in my desk drawer, the same one he hadn't bothered to check for, the symbol of how confident he was that I would never take control. I slid it into my pocket. That afternoon, I made 2 calls, one to my lawyer, one to the person who knew more about Mark's movements than he realized. I didn't explain everything. I didn't need to. I simply said, "I'm ready." By the time Mark returned home 2 days later, I was calm in a way that unsettled even me. He walked through the door, relaxed, sun-touched, carrying his bag like a man who believed he'd gotten away with something. "Hey," he said, smiling. "Long trip." "How was Portland?" I asked. He didn't hesitate. "Productive, exhausting." I nodded. "That's good." He paused, just a beat. Something in my tone made him uneasy. He set his bag down and reached for me, but I stepped back casually, like I hadn't even noticed the movement. "Did you enjoy your hotel?" I asked. His smile faltered. "What?" "The Ocean View Resort," I clarified gently. "Nice place, great soundproofing." The color drained from his face. "You went through my stuff," he said sharply. I shook my head. "No, you brought the truth home with you." He opened his mouth, to deny, to argue, to attack. I raised a hand. "I'm not here to fight," I said. "I'm here to inform you." I placed my phone on the table and pressed play. His own voice filled the room, laughing, planning, mocking. The silence afterward was deafening. Mark sank into a chair like his bones had been removed. "You recorded me?" he whispered. "I documented you," I corrected. "There's a difference." He looked at me like I was a stranger. And for the first time in weeks, I saw fear replace arrogance, because he understood now. The power had shifted, and I wasn't asking him for the truth anymore. I already had it. The collapse didn't happen all at once. It rolled outward, slow, public, and irreversible. Mark didn't yell after I played the recording. He didn't deny it either. He just sat there, staring at the table like it had personally betrayed him. "You don't understand," he said finally, voice low and brittle. "It wasn't supposed to get like this." I almost laughed. "It always gets like this," I replied. "You just didn't think you'd be the one paying." He reached for my hand. I pulled back. That small gesture broke something in him. Within 48 hours, everything unraveled. Word traveled fast, not because I spread it, but because secrets rot loudly when they're exposed. Tina stopped answering Mark's calls. His coworkers stopped inviting him out. The conference excuse fell apart the moment someone posted photos from the Ocean View Resort tagged with dates that didn't match his story. Then came the consequences he never imagined would touch him. The company. Mark's work depended on trust. Referrals, partnerships, reputation. When clients started asking questions he couldn't answer, jobs disappeared. One contract was postponed, another was quietly reassigned. The phone rang less, then barely at all. His sister called me one night, voice tight. "I didn't know," she said. "I swear, but people are talking. Clients are asking if he's stable." I thanked her politely and hung up. Mark's family didn't take sides loudly. They never do. But distance crept in. Dinners were canceled. Messages went unanswered. Silence replaced loyalty. And then there was her. The woman from the hotel called Mark 3 days after he got back. I heard his side of the conversation from the hallway. "You said you were separated. What do you mean your wife has recordings?" "No, I didn't know she'd do that." He came into the living room afterward, pale and shaken. "She's done," he said. "She blocked me. Says this is too much drama." Too much. I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not relief. Just confirmation. That's when I realized something important. The affair didn't survive exposure. It thrived on secrecy, on fantasy, on the idea that real life couldn't touch it. Once the truth arrived, it suffocated. Mark tried to bargain. "We can fix this," he said one night, pacing. "Counseling, time, I'll cut contact, I swear." "You already swore," I replied calmly. He tried anger next. "You humiliated me," he snapped. "You didn't have to make this public." "I didn't," I said. "You did. Every time you lied. Every time you laughed." Finally, he tried fear. "What if I lose everything?" he asked quietly. I looked at him. Really looked. "That was never my responsibility," I said. The divorce papers went out a week later. He didn't fight them, because he couldn't. The house was in my name. The savings were traceable. The recordings were undeniable. He packed his clothes while I was at work, just like I asked. Left his key on the counter. Didn't look me in the eye when we crossed paths one last time in the driveway. I didn't follow him with my gaze. The town watched quietly. Some with sympathy, some with curiosity, a few with poorly hidden satisfaction. But something strange happened once Mark was gone. The whispers softened. The tension lifted. People stopped avoiding me, stopped treating me like the woman who didn't know. Instead, they looked at me with something closer to respect. Not because I had exposed him, but because I had walked away without breaking. That night, I sat alone on the porch, a glass of water in my hands, listening to the rain finally taper off. Across the street, Mr. Sykes nodded at me from his chair. "House looks steadier," he said. "It is," I replied. For the first time in months, I believed it. Healing didn't arrive like a sunrise. It came like a house after a storm. Quiet, damaged, but still standing. The divorce finalized 3 months later. No courtroom drama, no last-minute pleas. Mark didn't fight it. By then, he didn't have the energy, the leverage, or the audience. He moved 2 towns over and took smaller jobs under someone else's license. The kind of work that keeps you busy enough not to think too much. I kept the house. I kept my name. I kept my life. At first, the quiet felt too loud. I'd reach for my phone to tell him something mundane, a cracked tile, a ridiculous headline, and then remember there was no him anymore. That reflex took time to unlearn. But something else replaced it. Peace. Not happiness, not yet. Peace is smaller, more honest. I fixed the things I'd put off. Painted the bedroom, the color I always wanted. Replaced the porch railing. Opened windows, even when it was cold, just to remind myself I could. People stopped asking questions eventually. Small towns always move on. There's always another scandal, another story, another couple whose private life becomes public entertainment. What stayed wasn't the gossip. It was the lesson. I learned that trust is not the same as blindness. That loyalty doesn't mean silence. That loving someone deeply does not require shrinking yourself so they can feel bigger. And I learned this, the one truth I wish I'd known sooner. Betrayal isn't about desire. It's about entitlement. Mark didn't cheat because I wasn't enough. He cheated because he wanted more without losing anything. And when the truth arrived, it didn't destroy him. It revealed him. Months later, I ran into him at the grocery store. An accident, a glance, a pause. We nodded politely, strangers with shared history, and kept walking. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel sad. I felt done. That night, sitting on my porch with the lights low and the town finally quiet, I thought about the woman I was before the handcuffs. Trusting, organized, certain that doing the right thing would always protect me. I don't regret her. She built the life I still get to live. But I'm not her anymore. Now I listen when my instincts speak. I ask questions. I pay attention to what people do, not what they promise. And I never confuse peace with boredom again. Because real love isn't exciting all the time. It's steady. It's honest. It doesn't require secrecy, lies, or keys you hide in your pocket just in case. Sometimes the best ending isn't revenge. It's clarity. And sometimes the strongest thing a woman can do is walk away with her dignity intact and never look back.